Hi, and welcome to Bite-Sized Bat Reps, where we bring you great battle reports without taking up a great deal of your time. So this is the thrilling conclusion of the narrative battle that spanned a couple of games, and this is the final divisional game. If you haven't seen the previous games, then you can find the links in the top right corner. And if you have, then stay tuned for this titanic conclusion. To remind you of what the situation is and what we're fighting about, we have the Swedish Division under General Horn attacking from the south versus Tatars under Nal Bay, all fighting around the town of Kobograd. And after 3 skirmish games to set up the field in preparation for the divisional game, the situation is as you can see, with the town of Kobograd is in Swedish hands with significant forces deployed inside the town. The Pontar Hill is firmly in Tatar hands with significant Tatar forces deployed on the hill, and the center is neutral, but because the center skirmish was won by the Tatars, they will have a scouting advantage going into this game. Let's get going with Scenario 4, Divisional Game. So here you can see the two forces, the 2 divisions, and as you can see the points. So the Swedish division is 44 points, and at the time of the game, we thought that the Tatars were 40-point division, so we had 4 points of difference. But when I was putting this video together, it turned out that the Tatar division was actually 36 points. So yeah, there's 4 points unaccounted for, and there you go. For the effects, we had at the time thought we had 4 points, so there was one major effect rolled up, and it ended up being delay, which hit the mercenary raiders, so they'll be coming on board a little bit later into the game. And there's one choice of terrain. And to represent the early morning skirmishes, because you can, for the scenario, basically what's happening with this divisional game is that it's happening early midday after early morning skirmishes. Some of the losses that were suffered in those early games are now carrying over into the divisional game, and to abstract them away, on the Swedish side, we ended up with 2 major march loss effects applied to 2 different regiments and 1 minor march losses. So 3 bases were taken away from the National Raiders, the main force. 3 bases were taken away from the veteran mercenary infantry, and 1 base from the mercenary raiders. And then on the Tatar side, they only suffered heavy losses in 1 of the games, so they lost 3 bases for the Nogais Chamble and 2 minor panics for the other effects. And here is the deployed division on the field of battle. So going left to right, you can see Kobograd on the far left with some Swedes occupying buildings. You can see the crossroads in the middle and Pontar Hill on the right with some Tatars deployed on it. Now there's a hill that's right now sitting in crossroads. It'll move in a second. So this is the choice of terrain effect. So this hill basically was not part of the initial setup, and then the Tatars were able to sneak the hill onto the board, and this, I guess, essentially represents that the Swedes didn't know the terrain as well as they thought they did, and so they were surprised to find this hill right in the middle of the field of battle. And here are the forces after deployment. So on the Swedish side, going left to right, you have Colonel Rappe with his mercenary infantry occupying the town of Kobograd, and some pikemen are kind of left by the cannons. You have the veteran dragoons that are attached to the infantry regiment. You have the artillery battery protecting the town. Then you have the main forces with national veteran raiders holding up the center under Colonel Amundsen, and the Polish light cavalry allies under Colonel Czadowski are on the right side. And then Colonel Stigson with his mercenary raiders will be coming on the board later on, as it has been delayed. And this actually works nicely for the story, because given that the raiders suffered such heavy losses in the early morning's fighting, it makes sense that part of the raider force is still being reorganized. They're still recovering and trying to get themselves to the field of battle before the battle begins, but not quite making it, and just coming on board a little bit later on. On the Tatar side, up top, you can see the Cossacks are on the far left under Cardinal Platov. They will be trying to seize Kobograd again, having been beaten back originally. Then you have Mirza Timur with his Tatars supporting the Cossacks. You have Mirza Rinat with his Chambal as the main force, and then Mirza Kazbek with a small Chambal on Pontar Hill, and Nalbey's leading the entirety of the force. Here's a different look after deployment, down the Swedish lines, and a close-up on the Cossacks with their wagon artillery. So you can see that they brought actually, I think, 2 cannons this time around. So there's a significant amount of firepower that's available to the Cossacks that will be pounding the Swedes defending the town. The middle, and Pontar Hill itself with Tatars and a small contingent of Cossacks defending it. And for the scenario, we decided that each of these strategic points is worth 2 points, 2 victory points, so that's what we're kind of fighting over. Now look at the Swedish battery standing in the field. And the allies, the Polish Cossack-style cavalry. Right before the battle begins, the Tatars execute their march move. That's thanks to their reconnaissance effect, so the main force is able to move up a little bit. And we're going to get started with turn 1. General Horn looks on as the Swedish forces advance. Not much happens first turn for the Swedes, so on the left side, Dragoons push up towards the town. General Horn wants to occupy as many buildings as he can and defend the town. And on the right side, the Polish cavalry pushes up as well to screen and engage the Tatars. So a closer look at Kobograd. And the Tatars respond with 2 significant movements. So on the far left, the Tatars under Mirza Timur are moving left. They'll be encircling Kobograd from the left side. And on the far right, Mirza Kazbek is taking his Tatar force and then circling on the far right side. So the Tatars are doing this wide encirclement, as they're prone to do, trying to get behind the Swedes on both sides. And then the center just pushes up to slowly start engaging with the enemy. Just a closer look at the Cossacks as they're moving towards Kobograd. And Pontar Hill is now defended only by the 4 stands of Cossacks. In the shooting phase, artillery opens up onto the Cossacks. So thanks to that hill that's been placed in the middle of the field, the artillery really doesn't have great targets. It can only see the Cossacks and not the Tatars, which is going to be a bit of a problem because the Cossacks have a lot of figures that can take the casualties. They make great, I guess, literal cannon fodder as they're absorbing the artillery hits. And then the Swedes themselves also take fire and lose a base from the Cossack artillery, so the defenders of Kobograd are starting to take casualties. And end of turn 1 looks like so, with first blood in Kobograd and the Cossacks suffering some losses and getting disorganized. Turn 2. So the Tatars win initiative and they push up, as you can see, just establishing a line. And on the far left, actually, the Tatars decide to charge that building with the Swedish defenders just to test the Swedes out, see how determined they are to hold that building. Here's a shot of the center as it establishes its line. And the far right. The defenders of Kobograd. And then the artillery opens up again. In their moves, the Swedes decide to do something really aggressive. So General Horn doesn't think much of his allies. He doesn't see them as a unit that'll stand and fight for a long time with a low breaking point, and so he decides to throw them into combat early on, commit them fully, get them to cause as much havoc in the Tatar lines as possible and then have them break, which is probably going to be fairly inevitable. And so he orders a charge with the Cossacks and moves up the elite Cossacks to support, and charge with the far right Cossacks as well to try to catch some of those Tatars now that they've moved already. And look at the left side again. And in the combat phase, we have something that's fairly predictable, where the Tatars did very little to the defenders caused some hits, and the Tatars lose combat and actually roll terribly for their morale and just outright break and flee. And in the combat on the right side, the Polish Cossack cavalry catches the Tatars, beats them soundly, chases them again, and breaks them. So that action was a huge success, but they are now left somewhat in the open. And then the artillery keeps on firing in the second firing phase and causes another base destroyed for the Cossacks. But in return, the Swedish defenders in Kobograd also lose a base. And at the end of turn 2, big news, Colonel Stigson does make it onto the field of battle finally. So the veteran veteran mercenary raiders make it onto the field. End of turn 2 on the far right side. And you can see just how out of position these guys are because of the chase movement that they made. So the charge plus the chase, they're really far forward and their supporting troops are well behind. Turn 3 kicks off with the Swedes not being able to rally or reorganize any of their wounds, so they're sitting on 2 wounds with 2 bases, so that Kobograd crew in the first building is more than half depleted. But the Tatars also don't rally that one fleeing unit, so they'll keep on fleeing. And on the far right, the Polish Cossacks didn't make the charge last turn, just the way the bases worked out. It was a bit of a planning error, and now they're continuing their charge, but of course they're not going to be supported, and because they didn't catch their enemy the first time around, they're a little bit out of position now. The defenders of Bunter Hill. So the Tatars seize initiative, move first, and there are no surprises. So in the center, they attack the Polish Cossacks in the flank, but one thing that they do that's really efficient and clever is that they shift a large contingent of Tatars to screen their charge. So the elite Cossacks that are kind of mid-left of the screen, they were going to support their brethren with a charge of their own, but now they've been cut off and they have an enemy straight ahead and they can't support their brothers. And on the far right, the Tatars charge into that other out of position Cossack unit. So here's a close-up at the action in the center. You can see the screening Tatars on the bottom right. And on the far right, the 2 Tatar units now charge and surround that one lonely Cossack unit. In response, the Swedes do what they can. They move their raiders up to try to support their troops. The mercenary raiders keep moving up, and those Cossacks that were supposed to support their brothers charge in, but they're not engaging with the right enemy. So this was a huge blunder by General Horn's staff and by his colonels. The elite Cossacks are rushing to the aid, and they're just not going to make it. And in Kobograd, the only major development so far is that the Dragoons dismounted and occupied that one extra building, so 3 buildings are occupied. Here, this combat on the far right goes predictably, and actually the Cossacks end up whiffing most of their rolls. They end up scoring, I think, only 1 hit, not even killing a base for the Tatars. They don't take too many hits, but they obviously lose combat. They're surrounded, so they flee, and they flee off the table. And in the center, yeah, again, the Cossack elite again has a terrible time charging those Tatars. They should have been able to win that combat just with their impetus and with their high skill, but they end up whiffing most of the rolls and barely tie the combat, so they basically bounce instead of beating and chasing down that rabble. And of course, in the top left, that Cossack unit that was caught in the side and had nowhere to retreat loses combat and gets pushed into the enemy and gets destroyed. So the Polish allies have been, at this point, almost entirely destroyed. And in Kobograd, more bad news for the Swedish defenders. They end up losing another base to the fire. A couple of them are wounds. So there's a single wound on one base remaining in that forward building. Colonel Rappe is looking at his defenders and trying to encourage them to stay in the building and keep on fighting. And Pontar Hill. The Cossacks on Pontar Hill are not being challenged. They did end up losing one base to artillery fire, but they passed their morale tests and they're sticking around. And in the end of the turn with the second firing stage, the artillery battery keeps on pounding the Cossack cannon fodder units, and they kill another base and cause some wounds to the wagons, but they don't destroy a wagon. And of course, at the end of the turn, the Polish allies withdraw. Colonel Charski is completely disappointed with his Swedish companions and having been asked to charge unsupported, he's done bleeding for the Swedes and he withdraws from the field. End of turn 3 looks like so, with the Tatars now kind of pushing around the far sides. Kobograd is still firmly Swedish. Pontar Hill has the 3 Cossacks defending them, and the Swedish main line is in the center, just getting ready to skirmish with the Tatars. Turn 4. Let's kick this off. So the Swedes end up winning initiative this time around, and they push their raiders up to form up lines and try to prepare a charge in the coming turn, and get ready to receive a Tatar charge if it comes. And in Kobograd, one of the wounds gets reorganized, the other one doesn't, so there's only 2 wounds left in that one building, and the Tatars keep moving up. And in their move, the Tatars do charge in the center. The Tatar elite, the 6 bases of their elite cavalry, charges down the middle straight at the armored raiders, while the other Tatar block just moves up to skirmish with the Swedes. And the Cossacks are pushing back towards Kobograd as fast as they can. Colonel Platov is looking at the city as his artillery is pounding that building and slowly but surely wearing the defenders down. And the center, the Swedish elite armored raiders are about to take on the Tatar elite. The Tatars charge in, and the Swedish armor fails completely. The Swedes lose a base, cause very little wounds, and withdraw broken. They actually flee. And in Kobograd itself, the combined artillery fire and Tatar fire kills that remaining base, and that one building is now empty. So 2 buildings remain in Swedish hands. Here's another look at the center. And turn 5 kicks off. General Horn is starting to get worried. His raiders have failed in the center, but they do rally. So the armored raiders are back in action. They reform on the right side, and he reestablishes his line with the other veteran raider squadron in the middle to try to take the Tatars on if they come charging down the middle. And in further bad luck, the ammunition wagon blows up. Sometimes you roll 2 10s in a row, and this was one of those days. So The ammunition wagon blows up and takes out the extra crewman on the medium gun. Tatar Elite gets ready, and right side, the Swedes just form up their lines. And on the far right, the Tatars keep on encircling the Swedish line. So now they're behind the Swedes. That small Tatar force under Mirza Kazbek is finishing up its encircling move. So Tatars move in the center. They charge Swedes. Like so. They move up on the left side as well. And in this combat, and there's the right side. So for the center combat, which was critical for the Swedes to hold their lines, the Tatars win the first round and they push the Swedish Raiters back, but the Raiters are disorganized, not broken, so they're still in the fight. And the Tatars give chase and they run into the pikes, and combined forces of the pikes and the Swedish Raiders are able to push the Tatars back, killing their base and making them withdraw. So end of turn 5 looks like so, with the center now being severely threatened by the Tatars with that one skirmish that's pushing forward, and on the right side, the Swedes have drawn up their lines, and Kobograd is still very much in Swedish hands. Tatars and the Dragoons exchange fire. They both end up losing some wounds, and the situation looks like so at the end of the turn. Turn 6. The Tatars end up getting initiative again, and their elite cavalry charges down as well. The Swedes countercharge with their armored raiders, determined to push the Tatars back. And on the far right, the Swedes set up a caracal just to engage the Tatars with some sort of gunfire and hopefully threaten them, maybe break them if they get lucky. Combat in the middle. And in Kobograd, the Tatars are pushing around the buildings to keep on attacking the Dragoons from safe distance, from above 10 centimeters, just not to be in an effective range. And on the right, the Cossacks are pushing into the town of Kobograd as well. Now that one building is empty, they can start occupying buildings and slowly taking the town. In the center, finally, the Tatar cavalry has finally exposed itself to Swedish cannon fire. They take case shot into their flank, lose a base, and withdraw disorganized. The Swedes give chase, engage them, and kill more of their cause a couple of wounds, but they don't actually break the Tatars. The Tatars are pushed back disorganized, which is disappointing to General Horn, because he really wanted to push the Tatars back through their own ranks and maybe cause additional panic tests. Another shot of Kobograd, which is still in Swedish hands, but Colonel Rapp is now pulled back a little bit, just getting ready to move back if need be, if the Cossacks keep on advancing. And in the second firing stage, cannons open up on the Tatars again. They destroy another base, and this time around, the Tatars finally do break and flee through their own units, causing disorganization and pushing the Tatars back. So the center has been defended. And the cannons keep on firing onto the Cossacks, causing more wounds and killing more bases. However, at the end of the turn, the infantry has had enough. They failed their motivation test with an 8 and withdraw from the field, also causing half of the cannons to break, including the medium gun, which leaves the Swedes with only 2 regiments left, both of the Raiters, the National Raiters and the Mercenary Raiters. However, at this time we ended up running out of time and decided to call the game because the Swedes would not be able to really come back with just those 2 regiments. And the final situation is as follows, with the Swedes kind of holding the center but not being able to take Ponter Hill. And with Kobograd now vacated by the infantry. Now, technically, I know that those bases should have stayed in the buildings and just kept on losing wounds, but it just, given that we're finishing the game anyway, they would never rally. We just decided to pull them out and basically represent that the infantry regiment is withdrawing from the field. The outcome. So, after this battle and after the Swedish forces withdrew from the field, the losses are as follows. There are 2 broken regiments from the Swedish Division, with 2 more regiments having suffered significant losses. Or the National Raiders, at least the veterans are still doing okay. The artillery suffered a bunch of losses with guns that fled, and dragoons fled with the infantry. On the Tatar side, no regiment reached its breaking point, but 2 of the regiments were starting to come close. And so the losses were very heavy on the Swedish side to acceptable on the Tatar side. And strategic point-wise, Tatars have Ponter Hill and the crossroads, but the town of Kobograd is in no one's hands, which is a 0-7 or a Tatar strategic victory. And the way the game played out, for the final engagement, the action opened up on the right wing around Ponter Hill, with the Polish allies making a spirited charge, causing some wounds, but being ultimately driven off by the Tatars. Then in the center, the Swedes and the Swedish Raiders and the Tatars skirmish, and both sides suffer some losses. And on the left, the Swedes are pushed out of Kobograd by the combined forces of the Cossacks and the Tatars. And at this point, General Horn decides to withdraw from the field. That's it. Hope you enjoyed this linked scenario game. I know we enjoyed playing it quite a bit, and huge thanks goes out to my friend who was very patient with me as we played through all the scenarios and put this together. If you're ever thinking about doing some sort of linked division skirmish games for By Fire and Sword, I can't recommend this enough. I think it really adds to the game to have a bit of a story to tell and to have some sort of a lead up and some explanation for those effects like panic or march losses or some of the things that happen. So if you've only played kind of regular games, I really recommend putting together a story-based narrative game where things kind of lead into the next game and give you some context. That's it for me. I'll see you next time on Bite-Sized Bat Reps.